FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome, and you are listening to the Financial Survival Network. It's Kerry, Lutz. And believe it or not, a study that we're going to be discussing has shown that people who spend less and save more are happier. And right now I'm talking to Danielle Park, who is a very happy person. So you must be saving a lot of money, Danielle, huh?
You know what? I do save a good amount of money, and I do take pleasure in buying things like used goods. I buy used clothes, and believe it or not, people think that maybe is pretty eccentric, but I find that to be a really intelligent thing to do. You can get all sorts of really cool things that are recycled, reused, and at a fraction of the cost. And my take is always that it's about efficiency. If you can reuse goods and save money, then you can, not only could you potentially consume more, although that's not my goal, is to consume less is my goal. But you end up with, that, I guess it's a worldview, and consumerism has really trained everyone to believe that they need to make more money so they can buy more things. And I think that the new wave or revelation that's sweeping through the world, and especially in the West, as they get older and because they're already indebted and they've already choked to death on things, is that they need less things, and less things are more liberating. And, it's this whole degrowth concept. Instead of perpetual exponential growth that's going to never be satiated and end up imploding the world, degrowth says, not only spend less to save more, but spend less to live more. And I think that is really a concept that's resonating with people.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like when it comes to getting a new car, I always look to buy a late model car with less than 10,000 miles on it. You get a much better deal. Somebody else has already taken the hit for the depreciation on it. Hey, my new house here, I didn't go getting fancy furniture. I had a little bit of furniture. Hey, overstock.com, and I put the stuff together myself, and it's a fraction of what it costs to go to like the major department stores and buy furniture like what I used to do. And yeah, I think that my only regret is I didn't come to this epiphany earlier in life. But what can you do?
Well, I think a lot of people, you had, 3 kids, Kerry? I think a lot of people get into, if you're living in an urban center, like you are, it's very expensive. It's expensive to raise a bunch of kids in, somewhere like New York or somewhere where I live. It's pricey. Okay, And I think that, if you look at that stuff we were putting on this week about how people are spending their paychecks, the huge lion's share of their income is going to what? Housing and transportation. And housing being this thing that has become very, very expensive. Certainly in Canada, I know that prices came down somewhat in the U.S. after your 06 peak, but rents have been on a tear in America.
4% annual increase average since the crash. That's huge.
That's huge. And also you've had a bounce back in many property markets. I know in areas like San Francisco, you're back near bubbly peaks from the prior top. So housing is this incredibly expensive component right now. And I think that the millennials and others who are starting to have epiphanies, as you said, are saying, wait a minute, why do I need to live in this much house? Or why do I need to live in this particular area when I have to sort of funnel all my cash flow into just keeping that roof over my head? And I think that that's where people are starting to figure out other ways to live that are more cost effective.
Yeah. And in places, Danielle, like actually in San Francisco and Miami and New York, prices are at record levels. Rest of the country, you still find many places where it's recovered like less than 50%, even parts of Florida here. And there was a great article on this very subject, what we're talking about, housing expenditure. Did you read the article about the guy who was working for Google and he got a truck or it was a van, a large van, parked it in the parking lot of Google, and he's living in the van I think he pays a couple $100 a month for insurance. And basically, Google has got facilities for everything for dining. They've got gyms, so he showers at the Google gym, and he's saving 90% of his income because he doesn't have a house. He's living, it's big enough. I guess he doesn't hang out there that much. He's young, probably out there with his friends most of the time. And Google expects you to work a lot of hours, but the kid is saving 90% of his income after taxes, putting it in the bank. And he's paid off his student loans already. And I don't know how long he's going to stay there. Google doesn't seem to mind. At first, a security guard questioned them, but they're okay with the concept. So,
I think this is really bringing into question. There's been a lot of stuff written and talked about lately about this old model of interest-bearing debt as a way to fund everything from education to housing to, investment infrastructure. There's a lot of people writing intelligent things, questioning how we move to this model where private banks make profits as everyone else struggles to just try and fund the things they need, like in terms of education training, to get sort of into a productive role in society where you are able to earn enough to spend and support yourself, but also to save and invest for the future. And I think that I really think it's a new era. I think we've run to the end of I used to call it the add debt and stir mantra, or the model where it's always about adding on more debt, because once you've got to the bottom of rates, once you've got to zero bound, that model really runs out of steam. And I think this, people are really starting to get it. And that's why I think we were talking earlier, younger folks are not that keen on owning cars. They can share. It's a sharing economy model, and that's much more efficient. I know Google, for example, has invested a lot into emission-free buses as well, transportation systems to move people around their property. I've read a lot of stuff lately on green technology in terms of buildings and the way they're being built, but also looking at where is that building situated? Because if you have this really state-of-the-art building that has a very low carbon footprint and recycles all its water, but makes every human that you have working there drive because it's not foot friendly, or it's not bike friendly, or in a area where people can easily come on public transit, then you're really defeating the whole purpose. So again, this idea about efficiency being all comprehensive, being about how people can live on less expenditure and be more close to where they need to be for their work, and therefore have more time for things like family and health and exercise, So it's a much smarter model, frankly, than what we've been through, say, in the last 30 years. And it's very exciting. I think everywhere I look, I see initiatives on it, and I think, oh, thank goodness the penny's finally dropping on this.
Yeah, well, the trend certainly, no question about it, is away from centralized workplaces. How many of you out there work from your home? I mean, I never did it before in my life. I've been doing it now for the past 3.5 years. And I'll tell you, it's definitely got a couple of negatives, like lack of social input from your coworkers. But hey, no commutation expenses, no wasted time. I mean, I figured out I used to spend close to 15 hours a week, I think it was. Yeah, 15 hours a week, sometimes 20, commuting.
Oh, yeah.
And it
well,
was
and in
what?
again, in the New York area, it's astounding how slow you move around there. Even on public transit, even in shared anything in terms of transportation, it's very difficult. Another thing, just on this idea of how we all got into this debt, how our countries, our governments and our households became so indebted. It has very much been the consumption model, but also the spend now and pay it off over time model.
Yeah.
Which layaway plans in the, in the Depression era, and then, got to this whole commercialization of credit through the real economy, through whether it's governments using private banks to raise capital when they could actually be self-funding. They started doing all these things that would grow the bottom line for the private banks at the expense of everything else. So here's an example. I know we've talked in the past. I think you even had a guest on your show at one point talking about Asian money coming into North American realty markets, right?
Yeah, that realtor from New York City, and she really knew her stuff.
Absolutely.
Stanier,
so
I think
I have realty friends as well who have been telling me, you don't understand because Asian money brings in cash, and they've been buying up property in all these hot sectors or hot areas in Canada. It's Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary was in a big boom. But recently, we've had a downturn in some of the leading markets, Calgary being one of them, because of the oil bust, much like you see in places like Texas. All of a sudden, there's a lot of these high-end homes that have appreciated a lot in value over the past, say, decade, are now mean reverting the other way because people are moving out, and there's this gut of supply of this really expensive housing, 1 million plus category. And there's less and less people with the ability to take on that kind of debt or interest in doing so. But the other factor is, there was a story that our Globe and Mail, as our business paper up here, has been doing a series on real estate markets in Canada. And last week there was, they did a bunch of articles on mortgage fraud and how we've replicated in many ways the U.S. model.
Congratulations.
Hey, we're smart. We follow you guys all the way. So anyway, there's been a lot of liar loans and fudging documents and this sort of thing to get people into houses at every cost. But then there was another expose on, for example, in Vancouver, how there's a lot of people buying up houses and then leaving them empty, or putting in a student who's drawing on public benefits, got the money to the down payment from a relative back in Asia, for example, and then gets a big mortgage from a Canadian bank, which are underwritten by the Canadian taxpayers. So here you've got this terrible vicious cycle where the people that want to live there legitimately or work in the community, families can't afford housing, or they're strapped, like they're spending 89% of their income just to keep a roof over the head and sort of maintain the property, which is ridiculous. And even at these low rates, that they've been taking on this massive amount of housing expenditure, which leaves them so much little left to do anything else with. But at the obscene reality is that we're then backstopping this banking system, which is advancing loans, these high risk loans, because once prices have gone up as much as they have, the risk is very high that you're going to get a massive downturn in the price. So here we are backstopping all that through the CMHC, which is the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corp. So this whole mythology that it's all cash buyers is not true. And it's something like, 82% of the home sales in this particular survey found that there was a big mortgage held back through one of the big three Canadian banks. And, so it's the reason that we've been able to get bubble pricing in so many things is because of the free flowing credit, because it was backed by governments, because it was funneled through private banks who had incentive to put debt on everything that had any ability to have it. And so you get these insane high prices, which for a while look like they're progress, but then they implode and people realize they've wasted a whole bunch of capital and a whole bunch of life force trying to maintain an asset that ought never have been at that price in the first place.
Totally. And I'm just looking at old report I had, but basically just think, Danielle, what would a college education cost in the US if there was no such thing as a government-backed student loan or a non-dischargeable student loan that you can't get rid of in bankruptcy? It would be a fraction. What would a house cost if you had to have 30% equity or 25% equity in it? Or 50,
and not backed by the government agencies. I saw a story today. Fannie and Freddie are going to need some infusion of capital from Treasury in the recent quarter. Now, your Treasury's been skimming all the proceeds out of Fannie and Freddie and taking them into the general revenues of the government the past few years, since it's been making net income again. But the government it sounds all fuzzy and great that we want everyone to be homeowners and the government should help and facilitate. I think that's the worst thing the government should do. We should not be involved in getting people into housing. We should be encouraging saving. And when people have built their savings up, they can do other things with it, like invest in housing, if that makes the best sense. But it's because we've aided and abetted these credit bubbles that we're all now paying the price in every possible way.
Absolutely. And Elizabeth Warren was talking about this, but the financialization of worldwide economies is just leading to disaster. It's leading to unaffordability of basic items that you want to live, like housing, like automobiles. Because if you had to pay for your car in cash, which you did in the 60s, basically, the cars were a tenth of the price of what they are now. And item after item, healthcare, another example. Government pays for it all. The sky's the limit because you want the best healthcare you can get if, God forbid, you get sick. And all these things, the government and hypercredit just has jacked up the prices on to unaffordability. And then we go back to the millennial trend of unwinding this play. And it's going to be painful to have this paradigm shift that really has to occur.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that is helpful is the demographics, because the boomers are that much bigger than the workers coming right behind them. As the boomers eventually do retire, although they're doing it much later than many had hoped or expected, as they do ease out of the workforce, you do have less people coming behind, which would be supportive of wage pressure to some extent. However, you've got the whole robotic wave as well that'll offset some of that, but at least that's good news. And I think, as we've just said, once you've already had falling rates for 30 years and you've got to the very bottom of that and you've got bubbles everywhere you look, you get that sea change. It's forced. It's of necessity because people can't borrow more. But I think it is this psychological shift. And then you have a generation or two of people who are all about trying to get rid of debt, not start out in debt, not buy things more than they need to, live more frugally. At the same time, you have the whole obsession with financial assets to make up for income deficits starting to go the other way as well. As you and I were saying, as interest rates fell for 30 years, income paying instruments, securities became the product du jour because everybody was looking for ways to bump up their income as interest rates fell. So they shifted the risk curve over to, quote, dividend paying entities, utilities, financial shares. And that really made a pool of indiscriminate buyers at every price in that asset class as well. As yields, safe yields fell, riskier yields fell as well because people were herded into these instruments and you got a bubble in asset markets. But that's now mean reverting as well, Kerry. Utilities ETF, the U.S. utilities ETF's off about 12% from the peak in January. We're seeing the same thing in Canada. Corporate debt has been repricing lower as well. Now that's partly due to credit problems, but I think this mean reversion in risky assets is going to continue to make dividend yields move higher, where to reflect better the risk over time. That'll also be very positive for people because once they've built up some savings, it'll be like, well, what intelligent thing can I do? Not what speculative activity can I wager this on, but what intelligent thing can I do to earn compensation for my savings? And I think that will be a much healthier, much more accountable, more sustainable environment as well for people.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. You just seen, especially with the utilities and other stocks that pay high dividends, there was also a tax change back during the Bush administration that basically sheltered, at the time it was 85% of the dividends. Now I think it's 80% now. But basically your tax rate on dividends was 15%. And that just unleashed a wave of money into dividends. Dividend paying stocks, probably a good idea, probably good policy. Get companies to concentrate on paying dividends instead of whatever else they're doing that's uneconomical. Anyway, we got to get going, but find Danielle's work at jugglingdynamite.com. As always, you'll find the link to her site in the show notes to this interview on financialsurvivalnetwork.com. But hopefully, Danielle, we have an era of common sense that's about to descend upon us, you think?
I'd love it. That would be great.
Well, keep your fingers crossed. Hope for the best.
Thanks, Kerry.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.